Queen Amanirenas was the ruler of Kush at a time when it was fighting for survival. Located in the Nile Valley in present-day Sudan, Kush was a powerful kingdom that at its prime ruled the whole region all the way to Egypt. But the kingdom is now facing an existential threat. The rising Roman Empire has set its eyes on conquering Kush and the entire Nile Valley. Vast Roman armies are marching south to capture her capital city. The one-eyed queen, a veteran of many wars, chants prayers to ready herself for the brutal, coming battles. Queen Amanirenas prepares her army, some for watery battles on the Nile and others for ground battles across the desert. She climbs her war elephant and rides north to face the massive Roman forces. Will she prevail in her quest to protect Kush? Watch on to discover more, and don't forget to subscribe to Timbuktu Tales.
The queen sat alone in a semi-darkened throne room. These were dark times. She had a bad feeling. She felt the messenger's presence even before they appeared before her. She heard the footsteps rushing in long before they entered the throne room. When the messengers brought Queen Amanirenas the news that her husband King Teretekas was severely injured, she immediately stood up from her throne and rushed toward the place gates. She was waiting for him, as if he would be there in an instant. But the king was still several kilometers away, and it would take 7 more days, if the winds were good, for the boat carrying him south to reach Meroe. I must get ready. She stood over the gate, overlooking the Nile, and decided to make a prayer. Right behind the palace stood a massive temple dedicated to Amun, the great god. The queen, closely followed by her assistants and guards, walked toward the temple as the temple set behind her. She stepped into the vast complex where the priests were making a silent hum and went to seek a prayer to gain the strength for the inevitable coming battle. Queen Amanirenas was a veteran of many wars. As the co-ruler of Kush, she had gained a reputation for her fierce fighting and good swordsmanship, which she had learnt from her late uncle. It is through these battles that she had helped secure the northern borders against those marauding, faithless Egyptians. It is during one of these wars that she had lost one of her eyes, the left one, which had been pierced by those vengeful Nubian mercenaries fighting for the Egyptians. But Amun preserved me, she whispered to herself as she walked deeper into the temple. He preserved me for greater battles, and that time has come. Kush was under threat. The Roman Empire was on the rise and had set its sights on conquering the whole of the Nile Valley. Napata, the second most important city in Kush, had fallen, and now the Romans were concentrating their forces to attack Meroe, the capital city where Queen Amanirenas ruled from. Gaius Petronius, the Roman general in Egypt, was particularly keen on conquering Kush. The lands south of Egypt were rich in gold and iron, timber and grains, and other resources that Rome needed for further expansion. Petronius sought to mark his name among the list of Roman legends and would ensure that Kush came under his control. He imagined how well the Emperor Augustus will reward him when he finally gets Meroe and its great iron foundries under his control. If I conquer these lands, surely the Emperor will name me amongst his favored ranks, Petronius told himself as he watched from the top of a hill as his soldiers routed the last of the combined Kushite and Nubian forces at Napata. It was only a matter of time. He clenched his fist. Before the whole Nile Valley is under Roman control, and I, Petronius, am named governor of more lands. The general rode away on his chariot as his army finished the last of the remaining Kushite forces. King Teritechus had personally led a combined force of his Kushite subjects and Nubian allies to combat the Roman expansion. The king rode ahead on top of an elephant, while Nubian archers and Kushite swordsmen formed flanks around him and his lieutenants. They had met the Romans at the foot of the massive holy mountain in Napata, and the war started. The king's army had attacked first and gained massive momentum, breaking through extensive Roman columns. They came in on chariots and elephants, while a secondary force jumped into the warfare from ships deep inside the Nile. The Roman triremes emerged from the churning rapids of the first cataract, their oars straining against the current. The lead ship, Aquila, bore the scarlet standard of Legio III Cyrenaica, its crew weary but confident. Tribune Drusus, gripping the rail, squinted against the sun as the waters calmed into a wide, deceptively placid pool. Then, the horns sounded. From the reeds and rocky outcrops, a dozen sleek Nubian warboats surged forward, their prows carved into the gaping jaws of crocodiles. At their head stood General Tanum, his gold-crowned helm glinting, his spear raised high. "For Kush!" his voice roared across the water. "For Kush!" The soldiers in the boats responded, "Leave none alive!" The Nubian archers loosed. A black cloud of arrows hissed through the air, thudding into Roman shields and flesh. Men screamed, tumbling overboard. Before the legionaries could regroup, the Kushite boats rammed into their sides, the reinforced hulls splintering Roman wood. Tribune Drusus bellowed orders, but chaos ruled. Nubian warriors, their bodies slick with oil, leaped aboard, curved blades flashing. A legionary's head rolled across the deck. Another was hurled screaming into the Nile. The water churned, not from battle, but from the thrashing of crocodiles, drawn by the scent of blood. A wounded Roman flailed as a beast seized his leg, dragging him under in a swirl of crimson. Another crocodile clamped onto a Nubian warrior, but another fighter drove a spear into its eye, snarling as he wrenched the dying man free. Aquila was lost. Drusus, bleeding from a gash across his brow, saw his men butchered, their corpses feeding the river. He raised his sword in defiance, only for a Nubian axe to split his skull. As the last Roman ship sank beneath the crimson waters, General Tanum raised his bloodied spear in triumph. The Nile belonged to Kush, and the crocodiles feasted well. Back on land, fire and blood split the sky as the Kushites pushed the Roman northwards, forcing them to retreat into the confines of the Casa Ibrim, a massive fortress. But this was a trap brilliantly laid out by Petronius. As soon as Kushite forces walked into the valley, leading into the fortress, pursuing their enemies with the belief of an inevitable victory, they were suddenly attacked by a volley of Roman arrows. Their elephants, including the one on which the king was riding on, fell under this volley of fiery arrows at night. As it fell, the king jumped from his elephant and struck the ground hard, breaking his sword arm. Another arrow pierced his left chest, and before he could stand, another one struck his right leg. But the king, known for his many battles, dragged on and launched at the enemy in front of him, striking him with a club before collapsing on a pile of his own soldiers. "Fight on! Fight on!" he commanded his troops, charging them on as the light disappeared from his eyes. From the plateaus around the fortress, a battalion of archers endlessly showered them with arrows, while a legion of cavalry rode toward them in all directions, trapping them. The Kushite troops were in a desperate situation, far away from their supply lines on the Nile River, and more along the camel routes. "Protect the king! Protect the king!" The lieutenants started to yell as they realized the gravity of the situation. A small battalion of elite soldiers surrounded King Teritechus, who was now fully incapacitated, lifted and placed him on a boat. The soldiers formed a shield wall around the king that, after another bitter struggle, broke through the quickly advancing Roman forces. With the king in need of quick medical attendance, they raced toward the Kushite boats docked along the Nile, as behind them, the Romans celebrated the latest of their endless victories. 5 years earlier, using the same shock tactics, the Romans had fought their way into Egypt and defeated the Greeks, who had been ruling it for almost 300 years. The Greeks and the Kushites had, after years of fighting, agreed on stable borders. This had ensured the safety and independence of each state, and so they had traded with each other for ages, until that order was disrupted by the rising empire. The Romans were not just satisfied with ruling Egypt, which they had crushed easily. They had now set their eyes on Kush as well, to top it all. With Napata fallen, as the messengers had reliably confirmed, the next target would be Meroe. The queen needed to be ready. She bent in front of a massive statue of Amun and started to pray. "Ooh, great God, give me the strength to fight that which is in front of me. Ooh, great Father, protect my husband, our great king." Then she performed a series of rituals, accompanied by priests who offered extra supplications, until she was satisfied that she had said everything that she needed saying. She walked to the sacred lake and sat down to reflect. Many minutes passed. The sun was now setting on the opposite side of this artificial pond, whose building she had commissioned years earlier. She always found peace there, and had made it clear that her reflections at the pond should never be disturbed. Yet here there was someone now, disturbing her moment of silence. "Forgive me, my queen," the messenger said. "What is that cannot wait? What is so urgent that you must disturb my peace? I am sorry, my queen, but we had to deliver this message to you as soon as the rider delivered it to us." "Speak," she commanded. "Our spies at the northern swamp have spotted Roman legions moving south. They are coming to attack us." The queen shrugged her shoulders. This wasn't news to her. She already knew what was coming. She made to wave her hand to dismiss the servant, but then he added, "Wait, my queen, there is more." "What else is there to be heard?" The... "Say what is to be said," she commanded. "My queen, the king is dead." Queen Amanirenas did not wait to hear the rest of the message. She walked back to the steps of the sacred lake and dipped her feet in. The servant bowed and quickly walked away. A lone tear dropped from the eye of the queen and landed into the lake, fusing with the waters. As soon as the boats bearing the remains of the king and those of the few remaining soldiers landed at Meroe, the big funeral festival started. King Teritekas was embalmed and wrapped into a mummy. His body was placed into a sarcophagus richly decorated in gold and precious stone, and placed into a giant pyramid whose construction he himself had ordered years earlier. Queen Amanirenas walked ahead of the funeral party as his body was carried into the tomb. Their son, the Prince Akinidas, followed immediately behind the priests carrying the sarcophagus. They entered into the tomb, and after several hours of additional prayers and rituals, the king's tomb was sealed. Queen Amanirenas and Prince Akinidas, alongside other members of the royalty, walked to the edge of the Nile River and chanted a few last prayers for the king on his journey to the underworld. Mother and son stood along the edges of the Nile in silence long after everyone else had left. "The time for mourning has ended," she said to her son. "It is now time for war." At sunrise, Queen Amanirenas put on her armor, climbed upon her war elephant, and went to war. She rode quietly from the palace walls, trying to process everything that had happened and how to fight Rome, the greatest enemy Kush had ever faced. The drums of war echoed across Meroe as Queen Amanirenas rode forth at the head of her army. The Kushite forces, though battered from the defeat at Napata, had been replenished with fresh warriors, fierce desert archers, iron-clad swordsmen, and a new battalion of war elephants. The queen's remaining eye burned with fury, her grief hardening into a weapon sharper than any blade. She had no time for hesitation. The Romans, emboldened by their victory, were already marching south, their legions cutting through the Nile's fertile banks like a plague. Petronius had expected the Kushites to crumble after the death of their king, but Amanirenas was no ordinary ruler. She had spent years fighting alongside Teretekas, and she knew the land, the tactics, and the weaknesses of her enemies. Her first strike was swift. Under cover of night, Kushite raiders set fire to Roman supply barges along the river, choking their advance with smoke and ash. Then, as dawn broke, Amanirenas led a cavalry charge into the flank of an unsuspecting Roman cohort, her war elephant trampling men beneath its feet. The Kushites fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose, and for a moment, it seemed they might break the invaders. But Petronius was no fool. He had studied Kushite tactics, and he had prepared. When Amanirenas pressed deeper into Roman lines, seeking to split their forces, she found herself encircled. The disciplined Roman ranks tightened like a noose, their shields locking into an impenetrable wall. Javelins rained down upon the Kushite cavalry, and the war elephants, panicked by fire arrows, turned and stampeded through their own ranks. Amanirenas fought like a demon, her curved sword cutting down any Roman who dared approach. Yet for every soldier she felled, two more took his place. Her son, Prince Achinidas, fought at her side, his youth no barrier to his skill, but even he could not stem the tide. "Fall back! Fall back!" the queen finally commanded, her voice raw with fury. "To the desert!" The remnants of her army retreated into the arid wastes, where the Romans dared not follow. The sands swallowed the wounded, the heat sapped the strength of the pursuers, and Amanirenas vanished like a ghost into the dunes. Petronius, surveying the field of victory, allowed himself a rare smile. The Kushites were broken. Mero would soon be his. Yet as he turned his gaze south, he did not see the defiance still burning in the queen's heart. For months, Amanirenas licked her wounds in the desert strongholds of Kush. The Romans, believing her defeated, occupied more northern cities, taxed the people, and sent word to Rome of their triumph. General Petronius sat victorious at Qasr Ibrim and plotted his next step in the battle: march down to Mero, crush the queen, and conquer the whole of Kush for Rome. "It is my destiny to win this war. Jupiter, Mars, and all the great gods have placed upon me this great responsibility to grow our great state." Yet, the queen was far from finished. She had lost battles, but not the war. Queen Amanirenas set up a large camp on the opposite side of a massive swamp. Here, no Roman troops could invade without being ambushed. Here, all the camel caravans and boat shipments needed to recover the strength of her army could be housed in safety. The desert and Roman legions had weakened them, but the people of Kush, though occupied, had not surrendered to Rome. All she needed was enough time for her troops to recover their strength, which after many months at the swamp, they had. The supply lines were replenished with more camel loads of dried meat and fruits to feed her soldiers. More weapons were brought up north as the blacksmiths of Mero went into overdrive to enhance production. More silver and gold was brought on boats to raise a bigger army to replenish the Nubian archers lost in battle. The wounded soldiers were treated and recovered under the domes of their tents. Her horses and elephants were now back to full health. She was emboldened once again, and it was time to attack. She and her lieutenants had drawn a new plan of war. Instead of open warfare this time, she would make the Romans bleed until they begged for peace. "The Romans think we are weak," she roared to her warriors. "They think we will cower in our palaces while they steal our land. But we are the children of Amun, the heirs of pharaohs. Tonight, we take back what is ours." Under her command, Kushite warriors became shadows in the night. They ambushed patrols and vanished before retaliation could come. Roman forts burned, their granaries emptied by unseen hands. Petronius, frustrated, ordered reprisals, but each act of brutality only deepened the hatred of the people. He was quickly losing his grip on Napata. Petronius paced before his officers like a caged lion, his crimson cloak swirling with each furious turn. "Do you hear that?" he hissed, gesturing toward the distant swamps where Kushite war horns echoed. "That is the sound of barbarians laughing at Rome." His armored chest heaved as he drove his dagger into the campaign map, the blade quivering between Miro and the Nile. "I want the 6th Legion waist-deep in that stinking fen before dawn. Burn their reed boats, poison their water holes, every shadow that moves, put a pylon through it." Spittle flew from his lips as he grabbed the nearest centurion by the neck. "And when you reach dry land again, I want a road of corpses so wide that our chariots shall roll straight to Amanirenas' gates without touching dirt." He released the man with a shove, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Fail me, and I'll send what's left of your cohort to clean latrines in Gaul." Outside, thunder rumbled, as if the gods themselves recoiled from his wrath. From the high stone walls of Qasr Ibrim, General Gaius Petronius watched the sun bleed into the Nile, his jaw clenched in silent frustration. He had heard murmurs that the Emperor Augustus, seated on his great throne in Rome, was growing weary of this long-drawn battle. He could not afford to lose favor with the emperor. The Kushites had defied him, humiliated him, but the gods would not. Beneath the flickering torchlight of the fortress temple, he raised a golden cup of wine, letting its dark liquid spill over the altar of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. The scent of burning incense mixed with the iron tang of a freshly sacrificed ram, its entrails spread across the stone for divination. "Grant me victory, O great gods," he growled, "and I will lay the head of the one-eyed wretch at your feet." The priests chanted more prayers as Petronius rose up and walked out, clinching his great sword.
Rome would not be denied its glorious victory. I will never allow it. But seated on the other side of the Sahara Desert, down the Nile River, across the Sud Swamp, the Queen of Kush had her own plans.
Thank you for watching yet another episode of Timbuktu. Like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications to never miss a video. Are there any stories you would like us to work on? Feel free and share with us in the comments section below.